It's time for the news.
Another UFO sighting has taken place.
The leather's made out of cardboard.
The number you have dialed is in an alternate dimension.
Welcome back to Weird Week. My name's Jack DeMont, and I'll be your host. Daniel Kim, our producer, is not with us this week, unfortunately. He's got some life circumstances that he's got to deal with, and we should see him again next week. I'm going to go ahead and try to make this as smooth as possible. It's probably going to be a little bit of a shorter episode because it's just harder for me to fill the content up when I'm not having a real conversation. But I do believe the last 30 years of practice I've had of talking to myself should help me in this moment. All right, let's just jump right into things. I have a little bit of football talk for you. Again, I'll reiterate, we are not a football podcast, but when I do deem the news worthy, I will bring it up. We have a couple of topics today. The first being a group of football players in the NFL that have been suspended, 3 of them indefinitely and 2 of them for just a portion of the season, I believe, and why they got suspended. Now, it's due to sports betting on football. 3 of the 3 that got suspended indefinitely were betting on the NFL, and that's a big no-no when you work for the NFL. And then the other 2 were betting on college football, I believe, but they were betting on college football within NFL facilities, which gives you still enough personnel that has connections to other personnel within the college world and just all that kind of stuff, that it's just as illegal and messed up with the inner knowledge that you have to bet on. So I can understand the difference in terms between the two. I understand they take it seriously either way, but that they take betting on the NFL more seriously. It does remind me of a recent player named Calvin Ridley, who I believe 2 or 3 years ago was caught cheating in order to facilitate the bets that he was making. And it's unfortunate because it really put the Atlanta Falcons in a bad position. The Atlanta Falcons weren't necessarily doing amazing, but what he did really threw a monkey wrench in the whole situation. He was their star wide receiver at the time, and what he was doing was pretty appalling. If you go back and you watch the tapes, you find out that he basically, he'd catch the ball, he'd have a straight shot to the end zone and get a touchdown, and he'd just like cut backwards or cut left out of nowhere, and just random things like that, where it was like, oh, this guy's definitely not playing football, not to win. He's, he basically was throwing the games over and over again. And it was kind of, once it was found out and everybody realized it, saw it firsthand, it was pretty appalling. And so he got made an example of, and I'm surprised it happening so recently. These 5 guys have decided to still like go through with it and bet and whatnot. I think they maybe believed they wouldn't be caught as easily. They aren't as big of names as somebody like Calvin Ridley, but it doesn't change the fact of what things are, and you're probably going to get caught doing shady stuff. There's a reason they got these rules and whatnot. In other football news, Aaron Rodgers is getting traded from the Packers to the Jets. The Packers are historically known to be a really great organization. Aaron Rodgers is part of why they're known to be great, got them one of their Super Bowls. The Jets have won a Super Bowl early in their team's play history, but now have been fumbling quite a bit, a lot like my Chargers. I believe these problems stem from the top ownership and executives that are running things behind closed doors. I believe the Jets and teams like the Chargers, and just maybe not some of the best organizations in town. I think a lot of that stems from the top. Well, having a really good quarterback is like having somebody at the tippy top, but actually playing on the football field. And if you have a good enough one, he could probably instruct and guide the guys in a lot of ways that the executives and the ownership are not doing. They need, a dad figure, and Aaron Rodgers very much gives that dad like vibe. I love the idea. I think it's really nice to have Aaron going to a new team. It's going to kind of prove a lot to a lot of different people. It's going to prove whether or not Aaron was a product of being put into a really, really good situation from his rookie year, or if he really is just one of the greatest football players of all time. I believe he really is just one of the greatest of all time. And we'll see when he gets with this Jets team. They got a really young, good, strong team. A lot of the problems come from the leadership and things like that. They have a new head coach, fairly new. He's been around for 2 or 3 years now, but I think he's pretty good. And I think he was kind of the start of the turnaround of this organization. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers is kind of the end of the turnaround in terms of them finally turning it around. We need to turn it around too. Go Chargers, bolt up. But Aaron's going to the Jets. Speaking of jets, jet propulsion, there's a space race happening amongst private commercial moonlanders right now. From all over the world, there's countries that are competing to build the first commercial privatized moonlander and successfully landed on the moon. Now, in 2019, a nonprofit organization in Israel named Space IL had launched a moonlander and was the first commercial moonlander launch. However, upon impact with the moon, did not land, but much rather crashed, destroying the payload along with any included human DNA samples and thousands of tardigrades that were apparently on the ship. Now, and literally as we speak, there is a Japanese moonlander being sent to the moon, and hopefully, I mean, it could be literally landing at this moment. We're unsure. But if it's a success, it's the start of a really big wave of privatized commercial moonlanders getting sent to space, because there's already a handful in the US that are being made that are supposed to launch within this year or the next year or two. And that's not to mention all of the others that are being created all over the globe right now. So it's interesting. It's not the same kind of space race that we were getting into before. It's a much more commercial space race and corporation based, It's all about the money and being not just the first ones on there, but they probably want to get as many moonlanders on the moon as possible as soon as possible. So I'm assuming this is just the first of a few of from the same company, just like all these other ones. And it's just an exciting time. It's just interesting because we don't know what's going to come of all these moonlanders being sent up there. We just have inferences that can be made. And I hope it ends up with just really cool stuff. I hope it ends up with, humans living on the moon, things like that. Moving on. And I know we're just flying through this cast, guys, but again, as I am solo, I gotta just try to get through as easily as I can. And if I can't come up with anything else conversationally, I don't have any more thoughts, then I'll just move on. So here we are, moving on. Another space launch has gone awry. This one, instead of getting to the moon and crashing into the moon, this was a SpaceX Starship prototype that just exploded at launch. It didn't take off from the ground whatsoever. It left kind of a giant crater in the ground below it, and blew up tons of debris into the sky. The company SpaceX is going under a mishap investigation, trying to discover the root of why this explosion happened and if there's a way to prevent it in the future. Speaking of investigations, this one, maybe not such a mishap investigation. This one's pretty morbid, but super offbeat. 39 bodies were found in the investigation of a cult in Kenya. There is a cult that has been started in Kenya by a pastor named Paul Mackenzie, who, from what I can ascertain, started with children and used their malleable, impressionable young minds to start preaching his own beliefs. And he basically got them to start denouncing school and medicine. It's very easy to get kids to start denouncing school and preaching that they don't want to be a part of school if that means they just don't have to go in and do work. So to start with these to manipulate these children is cruel to begin with. And then on top of that, what started happening is now he's trying to get his cult members to, well, he has successfully gotten his cult members to start to starve themselves in order to see Jesus and be closer to God. They will die and go to heaven and see Jesus. These 39 individuals are suspected to have all died of starvation through their own will, but unknowingly, because some psycho is just convincing everybody that that's just what they need to do while he's still walking around and living his happy life. These 39 individuals are all dead. The investigation was interesting when they first went to go and pick up the pastor and detain him. They had found 15 emaciated people on site that had not passed yet, not a part of the 39 bodies they have found. But 4 of the 15 emaciated people did die shortly after because they were already past the point of no return, it feels like. It's a really messed up story. I don't know how else to put it. You can't approve of it in any way, shape, or form. It's sickening. It's disgusting. It brings up the question again of why do so many leaders, cult leaders specifically, that have this power to make people believe a certain thing that they try, like, it makes you question what is it within them that wants to manipulate all these people into a mass death. I don't know why everybody wants to kill, or while these I don't know why all these cult leaders want to kill their members all the time. I guess sometimes it seems like it's out of necessity. Jonestown was something where he felt it was out of necessity because he knew he was going to get caught and killed anyways. So maybe to try to cover up as much of his own tracks as possible. Then there's the cult of the I forget the name of the cult, but there was also the cult that had castrated themselves and then drank poison in order to be taken onto a comet that was supposed to be a rocket ship that would take them to God. Some crazy stuff. They always get convinced that they're going to see God, like, as soon as possible when they do this thing. Jonestown was even worse. They weren't even convinced that they were going to see God. They were just told to drink some Kool-Aid and died. Pretty messed up. And like Jonestown, I think, was the biggest one too. There was a lot of dead people in Jonestown. And it's just not it's just not a pretty sight. I believe Jonestown was also Jonestown, I think, was South America. But these 39 bodies were found in an investigation of a cult in Kenya. Somewhere else here in Africa, we've got more problems going on. This is with the Sudan crisis. And if you're unfamiliar with what's going on in the Sudan crises, let's get into a little bit, because it's kind of crazy. I had no idea what was going on until I looked into it further. And apparently, what's going on is Sudan, I don't know how to say it. I'm going to keep saying Sudan. Sudan's government changed in 2019 after a coup was erected to get rid of the dictator that they had. But this dictator had been ruling the country for over 20 years already and had created multiple military factions. There was now so these two factions, they worked together to try to kick him out of office, but now the two sides are basically warring with each other over who's like the more dominant military power of the country. So there's one military power that's essentially the government's military, like the official military of Sudan. Then there's this other paramilitary named RSF that were created by that dictator. And they're more of like a guerrilla militia. The problem is they have a lot of money still. This dictator, his right-hand man, his war chief, started building illegal mines during the dictatorship and raking in lots and lots of gold from these mines. And so now he's probably one of the wealthiest people in Sudan, if not the wealthiest, and has an immense amount of power just because of the amount of money he has now also. And he kind of does, as far as I can tell, doesn't want to let go of the power of being a military leader. He does, because he's not going to be able to control the government's militia. He's going to go ahead and keep the privatized one he already has. But it's creating a rift, obviously. The government military wants their people to know that they have domination over the land, and that they are the fighting force for the people, and that RSF is the enemy. They're not working for us. They're the enemy. They're brutal. And it's kind of true, though. The government military faction has much more regulated policies and things that they're gonna do by the book, as opposed to the RSF faction. They don't play by the rules in a lot of ways. They're willing to just kill, rape, pillage, and do all of the shitty things that you don't want out of a military power. So it's an interesting situation. I have no idea how it's going to play out. I can't see any kind of a prediction for this. I've looked into maybe like why the US isn't really getting involved and whatnot. And I think it's just too big of a situation for us to kind of like step into at this moment. It's interesting. The RSF militia has a ton of power. He's got tens of thousands of men on his side. They're really strong also, and they're putting up a huge fight against the real military of Sudan. Now, what's worse is that this has led to an extraordinarily dangerous situation for the entire world, because one of these military factions has overrun one of their laboratories in Sudan that has lots of harmful viruses and things in containers. And I mean, they're probably in secured containers and whatnot, but just the fact they are occupying a laboratory that has very, very harmful contaminants, and the spreading of these contaminants could be detrimental to the entire world. Again, from what I can look into, it doesn't seem like the US is getting themselves involved, nor many other countries. I can understand why. It's a weird, civil war type situations going on over there, and it's hard to kind of like get involved. But this seems like it's bigger than just the crisis in Sudan. If these viruses are not contained properly and they get out, it could potentially kill millions of people. I don't think first world countries like the US are as worried about it, especially because we have our shots from a young age. We get vaccinated and we get shots and we get all these things that we can be preventative in terms of certain diseases we know we can prevent, measles and whatnot. So I think part of why we're not so pressed to go in is because we're not worried that it's going to affect our country as much, things like that. But I think on the whole, it's such a devastating consequence if we don't do something to try to stop or try to prevent problems. Then I mean, I don't know. I just think it'd be very, very scary situation. Nobody knows. I would be afraid, especially somewhere like out in Africa, where I think disease would spread really, really rapidly. The last thing we want is for just like a stupid guerrilla military leader that's just like got so much money. He's just so full of himself and in his own head that he's going to cause, pandemic or something like that. Be pretty awful. But there's also a lot of positive things happening in laboratories right now, guys. I can get into a few of those. One of them's an experimental gel that has killed 100% of brain tumors in mice. The gel combines 2 cancer drugs and is directly delivered into the brain during surgery. I didn't get into it too deeply. It looks like it cures a brain cancer called glioblastoma, which is the most common form of brain cancer. Again, this has only been tested in lab rats, but it has cured 100% of the tumors. It's astonishing. And these kinds of breakthroughs in science, I really hope can continue to happen at a rapid pace in order for us to feel like moving into this future that we are moving into, we can all be safe. Because I think we are all terrified of every kind of disease or thing that you can get, and cancer being one of the scariest, because to so many people, the word cancer literally means death. Nobody wants to hear that word. Nobody wants to know that they have cancer. It could be skin cancer that's not even close to actually killing you, and all you hear is the word death. It's not fun. It's for those that survive it, it's hell to go through the survival process. It would be much cooler if we could find a way to get rid of tumors more painlessly, seamlessly, easily. I think we're finally on to some of that, which is awesome. I love it. I love it. I love it. Again, we're going to keep it kind of short today, guys. I'm just kind of flying through topics here. I'm already getting ready to wrap it up. Let's talk about some game stuff, some video game stuff. Firstly, there's a video game called Diablo. Diablo 4 is being released, and there's a version of the game which is common to the Diablo franchise called Hardcore. The Hardcore setting is just basically the most difficulty setting that you can play on, where everything is extraordinarily difficult to beat, but on top of it, you experience something called permadeath. It's basically in a video game where you should be able to die and resurrect as many times as you want. You are no longer given that option. You have one life with said character, and if you die, there is no bringing that character back. I find it intriguing because what they've said is for Diablo 4, where there's now going to be introduced player versus player areas, those hardcore players will still experience permadeath even in player versus player combat. It only makes sense that that would be the case once you've introduced player versus player with the hardcore element. You would assume if it's hardcore, they're still dying permanently anyways. But it really just ups the stakes for the people who are really serious about the game, who really, really want to prove that they're the best, at least to themselves. They can play on this hardcore mode and play against real people and live. And if they continue to just like not die as a player versus player character, that would be really crazy. It would be a sign of ultimate domination over all your competitors. Nobody would even want to touch foot near you if they found out you were somebody playing like that. It's pretty just pretty unique experience. I've heard of permadeath games. I've never played permadeath because I think it sounds like a terrible idea. It's not why I play video games. I play video games to be able to die in a video game and come back to life without any consequences. The last thing I ever want to do is get into a video game and immediately have to recreate a character because the first boss killed me and I was underprepared. I think it's going to work out really well for the Diablo veterans, but for players like myself who've never played any Diablo before this one, I don't think I could ever, maybe not ever, but I don't think I can play the hardcore mode. I think it's going to be a little too hardcore for me. Lastly, one more video game movie hybrid, right? Crossover. Everybody knows about the Super Mario Bros. Movie has broken almost all the box office records. Maybe not all the box office records, but they've broken a few. And I'm not surprised to hear it. They've opened with the highest profiting or the biggest movie opening for an animated film worldwide, grossing 377 million worldwide. Now, if you split it up into domestic versus international, they did not take the record for either of those, but added up their domestic and their international, they have grossed the most worldwide for an opening weekend animated movie. Pretty awesome. I like to hear that. It's a lot of hope for the franchise. It's definitely going to be a franchise. They've already spoken about how there's going to be sequel after sequel, so I'm sure it's more so going to be like a multiverse than anything. I think they've spoken about how there will be a Donkey Kong set of films versus the Mario set of films versus blah blah blah. They're going to keep just expanding because they can. They got the money. They got $377 million. The previous record holder of the biggest worldwide opening for animated films was Frozen 2. So I'm glad Frozen 2 was knocked off of its pedestal for Mario movie. I like that more. That's much more my style. But it's looking like it might it should by the end of its run become the highest grossing video game adaptation ever, but the highest grossing video game adaptation movie is currently Warcraft with 439 million globally. I think Warcraft did much better internationally than it did in our domestic for our domestic audience. I didn't like Warcraft whatsoever. I'm a huge World of Warcraft fan, and Warcraft was an awful movie. They just basically ruined the lore by trying to make it like too dramatic and just really messy and over complicated. I didn't enjoy it very much at all. So I'm not surprised they never came out with another one. It was supposed to have a sequel and blah 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 blah, but it wasn't very good. I didn't like it at all, and I'm surprised it actually still holds that crown because it was really bad. Yep. Not too good, man. I don't know. All right, guys. Got through it. Makes for a grand old time. I appreciate you guys for sticking with us and listening to the podcast. Keep on telling your friends and family and liking, subscribing, watching, listening, doing all the stuff. We have a lot of big things we want to take care of in the future, and we won't get it without your support. So thanks again for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys. Peace.